This is our last session of what has been a pretty amazing conference. And it says on the initial program a half an hour, and then in the description it said an hour. And because we're the last session, we can go as long as we like if the discussion is good. But we'll try to keep the program itself to an hour. And then if people want to stay in the room and talk or have breakout rooms for discussion, we can go ahead and do that. So we'll just see how things go. So thank you everyone for attending. This is Social Pedagogy Here and Now, and my name is Dana Keller, and I'll be your moderator today. I am a co-founder and executive board member of the Social Pedagogy Association in the United States, and I have a master's in social and cultural pedagogy from Arizona State University, and my field of study is play across the lifespan, and I'm going to be your moderator. During this session, first we're going to start off hearing from Kara O'Neill, and I'll tell you a little bit about her in a minute if you don't know who she is. And she's going to talk just briefly about what social pedagogy is. Some folks here may not yet consider themselves social pedagogues because it's in the United States especially, it's a fairly new term. So we're just going to start out with some just foundational information about social pedagogy. And then after Kara, I'm going to introduce 4 different speakers who are going to answer a few questions we have about their field of work and challenges that they're facing in today's political climate and with a pandemic going on and whatever other challenges happen to be going on in your part of the world, and just talking about how that impacts their practice. And then after that, we're going to open up the floor for any questions. And we'd be thrilled to have anybody else who wants to share their experiences as well. So I'm going to start off with Kara. Kara O'Neill is co-president of the Social Pedagogy Association in the United States and the person who really organized 99% of this conference. And she holds a master's in social and cultural pedagogy from Arizona State University. She's currently living in Germany and pursuing a doctorate degree in social pedagogy. So with that, Kara, would you like to get us started with a little definition of what social pedagogy is?
Control this way. So we're just going to do a very, very quick and easy definition of social pedagogy. We do have a session that has been recorded that we did the very first session of this entire conference that you can go back and watch if this piques your interest, if you'd like to learn a little more. And the truth is that a lot of these slides have been used in both in conjunction with THIMPRA social pedagogy, which you'll see up at the top of the screen there, and us, of course, the Social Pedagogy Association. We do a lot of work with Arizona State University. We are based with Arizona State University, and we are partnering with UCLan on this conference. So all of this information is sort of a compilation of these many organizations and educational institutions. So social pedagogy, what is social? Oh, look, we still have our stars. I'm going to leave our stars there, everybody. It's not planned, but they remain. So what is social pedagogy? So the term pedagogue actually comes from a Greek word that refers not to the teacher, but to the watchful guardian, who I think everyone in this Zoom room can kind of understand in some sense or another. The responsibility in this particular example of that person in antique Greek was to lead the young boy to school. And you can see these root words, agogos and paides, and that was the general root of pedagogy. So the idea behind this is that pedagogy was not necessarily an educational concept, which I know we have a lot of visitors here from the US and in the United States. When you hear the word pedagogy, at least I know that I do, and many people I've spoken to, we go very immediately to curriculum. So in this context, that's not really what we mean by pedagogy. We do mean education, but it's more of a leading sort of empowerment. It's a method of walking with somebody or even behind somebody as they lead the way, as they show you or maybe tell you who they are and what it is that they need to accomplish their goals. So that is our Greek root of pedagogy. Now I can't. There we go. So what is social pedagogy? So this is a perspective in some countries. It is a methodology in some countries. It is theoretical work in some countries. Social pedagogy becomes something different every place you go, and most of the organizations that we work with are all sort of working towards a global understanding of this practice or this discipline. It provides us a perspective, and the reason that it does that is because it starts from this idea of the inherent capability of every human, regardless of background, regardless of environment, regardless of experiences. Social pedagogues aspire to this belief that everyone has inherent capabilities of their own lives, of their own decision making, and everyone holds a special potential in regards to their life and in regards to their goal making. So that is our perspective, and this produces a very dialogical, a very participatory means of working with people. So we're not doing for people, and we are not doing to people. We are working with people to reach goals through this dialogue, through these discussions. We're helping them to navigate complex situations. We are navigating complex systems, and we are working hard to ensure that people have a genuine voice, that they are respected, that they have their agency, and that they are treated as autonomous beings rather than somebody that needs to be told what to do or led by the hand. Obviously, that flows naturally into being a relationship centered. I won't read the slide to you, but it's very simple. When you talk to people, you begin to make connections with them. So I feel personally like relationship centered is a very natural outcome of this dialogue and of this belief that all humans have this inherent capability and this inherent worth. And that is a universal kind of belief of social pedagogy, regardless of the field in which you work. That tends to be an underlying belief system. So it is very integrative. It does speak to a broad range of professionals. I hope that many of you are sitting in the room thinking of how this speaks to you and how this reaches out to you in your work and in your field of work. As Dana was saying, we've invited 4 people that maybe don't necessarily consider themselves social pedagogues, but are absolutely working in a field very similar to this. We've reached out to people that we know personally to really hold these values of inherent capabilities to work in these relationship-centered fields so that we can discuss with them. And this takes us to our next point, which I find to be an interesting one. And again, I'm going to focus this sentence on our American visitors because this is new to our US audience and less new to those I see Greece and Finland and Ireland, and you will all have this kind of perspective a little more than we have it in the US. But in social pedagogy, it's very important that we practice on both practice and structures. So we not only focus on the methodologies and the things that we do, but we focus on the systems behind the issues, or the systems behind the behavior, or the systems behind the need. So we don't just focus on how do we help hungry children, we give them food. Yes, absolutely, that is an important practice, but what is the structure that is building that hunger? So social pedagogues really try hard to look at these structures along with these practices and not get so caught up in methodology that we forget the systemic background of the reason that we're there, whatever that reason may be, whatever practice that may hold. And that naturally brings us to social justice issues, matters of marginalization, issues of social exclusion, social inclusion. All of these sort of issues can fall under this massive umbrella of social pedagogy, which is why we will bring that slide back up and you can show us your field and see the fields of other people, because we do reach out to a very, very broad range of professionals. So, whoops, sorry. So that does bring us next to our questions, and that's all I'm going to say about social pedagogy. I'd like to talk more with our fields that we've brought in with our special guests, and I'm going to pass back over to Dana and let her introduce our guests. And just so that Dana can know, I personally just let in Alicia and Amy, so they are also now here. So I didn't know if you saw that because I clicked that button. So I will let Dana continue.
Awesome. Thank you, Kara. Just before I introduce our first guest speaker, I'd just like to remind you that we're going to take questions after all the speakers have had their opportunity to share with us. So if you just want to write those down, or you can put them in the chat box, and Kara is going to keep track of those for us. And so when we're done with the speakers, we can come to those, and then we'll open it up for discussion and anybody else who wants to share their experiences as well. So today we have 4 speakers with us. I think 4, right, Kara? It's been changing off and on. We have Nikisha Killings with Lioness Lactation, Amy Barron-Smolinski, also with Lioness Lactation, Lois Scharf with the University of Central Lancashire, and Joanna Henderson from Arizona State University. Oh, and Alicia. Oh, sorry, Alicia. Where's your bio here? And Alicia Manuel, who's the founder of 3 Precious Miracles, and we'll hear a little bit more about her work. Oh, and Amy just corrected me there. She's with Mom to Mom Global Best Breastfeeding in Combat Boots. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Nikisha Killings. She has a Master of Public Health. She's a certified lactation counselor and an international board certified lactation consultant. She specializes in evidence-based, compassionate support, utilizing both innovative and time-tested solutions to create a unique care plan for every nursing parent and baby. And her consulting company is called Lioness Lactation. Nikisha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for me. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, Dana. I appreciate it. So I suppose you want me to go down the questions here.
We have the questions up on our screen here that each of the speakers is going to address. So yeah, if you could work off those, that would be great.
Got you covered. All right, so first, my current field of work is in lactation. As Dana said, I am a lactation consultant, which simply means I support breastfeeding with families in terms of helping them to be successful in both the normal course of breastfeeding as well as in more complex issues that they may be having, the more clinical issues. The larger part of my work, however, is in equity in the birthing and breastfeeding field. And so I spend a great amount of time educating both professionals as well as healthcare providers and organizations on implicit bias in healthcare in the United States and how to better support the families that come to them from marginalized communities. And so that's, that's the larger part of my work, in addition to what I like to term as the favorite part of my work is community consults in taking care of families in my local community at no cost. Generally, those are families that don't have access to lactation support, but have the greatest need. So that is the field I'm in. What challenges have I faced during my current and past advocacy work, and how have recent events interacted with those challenges? So that's a great question. So my work is unique in that I get to provide a service that folks need and want and seek after. And so the work is not in finding folks who actually need lactation support. It is in availing myself to be a resource to them. There are challenges with that in terms of getting to know the community that I serve. And so there are nuances depending upon where you are and the community that you're trying to serve in making sure that you meet the particular needs of the folks that have the greatest need. And so in terms of trying to find out what those needs are, getting to know those communities, getting to be a trusted agent in those communities, that takes work, it takes time, and often it takes a great deal of finessing relationships and partnerships that are local. I speak from this perspective as a military spouse in the United States, and so we move quite a bit. And Amy Smolinski will talk a little bit more about her role supporting military families as well. So I'll kind of hone it in here on the fact that my personal experience moving as a military spouse, I have the great privilege of being planted in new communities frequently. And in those communities, I have the great challenge of working really hard right away as soon as we get to a place to create an atmosphere of trust, an atmosphere of availability and access to those who need my services the most in a community. Quite often those are Black and brown communities is the term that we use. And that takes a little bit, even though I am a woman who identifies as a Black American, certainly that doesn't just give me a free pass into a community. I must be trusted. I must be someone whose voice can be relied upon as a genuine source of help and not one who's there to take, because oftentimes these communities are used to folks coming in and taking instead of giving. So that is where the greatest, I think, challenges in my advocacy work, my local work, comes in terms of creating um, uh, platforms, creating opportunities for families to come and engage and be supported wherein they feel safe. And a lot of that has to do with exactly what Kara spoke about earlier, about giving those families agency that they've lacked often in the healthcare system. They come to me fresh out of hospital or, newly pregnant and haven't been given a lot of an opportunity to really have a voice or feel respected in the process of birthing and breastfeeding. And so it's my job to make them feel all of those things, to allow them all the space that they need to feel heard and to honor their truths and believe them when they come needing help, and then of course to meet the needs as presented. Now, am I viewing my practice differently in light of the current political climate? So here's the thing. I guess I'm fortunate in one way, and it's that I've been doing this work for a long time. I've also been Black for a long time. That helps. And so that I've been keenly aware of what the needs are. So this is not new news to me. It's not new to me that there are challenges that exist and that communities have been underserved and underrepresented and have been not honored in their requests for being treated equitably in healthcare. And so I've been doing this work in this vein, the same way consistently for a very long time. What's new is the atmosphere in which I'm doing it. Now, more folks are aware of the issues. And so that's creating a little bit different of a dynamic, but not necessarily to the people that I serve. We've been doing, I've been able to be consistent in this, and the need has been consistent. We only have a great deal more exposure now, if you will. And I hope that that creates more opportunities for them to get help. So there's more of me out there doing this work. And so has my primary focus recently changed within my current advocacy work? So that's a great question. My not at a local level, my focus will continue to be providing a service to people who need it, continue to be providing equitable care and availing this level of service to organizations and folks that to individuals who wouldn't typically get it. What has shifted most definitely is my equity work at a larger level, as far as organizations being hungry for and wanting more information about how they can support families better. I've had people, texting me saying, "Oh my goodness, my boss is calling me in and they want to know more about this bias in healthcare thing all of a sudden this week. They want to know more about what equity looks like in terms of my organization. They didn't know this was a thing, but now it's on their radar, and I need to speak intelligibly when I walk into this office. Please equip me." And so this is a very new and interesting dynamic in my work, where I am now called to equip lay people with having these discussions higher up. And so it's fascinating and interesting, but certainly I'm honored to be in this space in this time and feel equipped because of the work that's been going on for so long.
That's awesome, Nikisha. Thank you so much for sharing about that. And when it comes to question time, I was going to type mine up there, but I'd love to know more about maybe some of the specific types of communities that you serve and the issues that they face. So
Absolutely.
we can talk about that later. All right. Thank you so much. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, who is Amy Barron-Smolinski. Amy holds a master's from Union Institute and University, where her thesis explored re-emerging sacred feminine manifestations in the lives of contemporary women. She is the executive director of Mom to Mom Global, a network of breastfeeding peer support, education, and advocacy for military families. She works with breastfeeding dyads in a variety of settings, from inpatient postpartum and NICU to home visits, telephone, and online consulting as an advanced lactation consultant and certified lactation counselor. Supporting breastfeeding families has shown her how each parent's breastfeeding journey with each of her children is a reclamation of her connection to her inner wisdom and power. Amy is an actress, director, and professional voice artist in Germany, where she resides with her husband, an Army reservist, and 4 sons, all of whom breastfed to self-weaning. Nice to have you here with us, Amy.
Thank you, Dana. Hi. And I just want to thank you, Nikisha, and let everyone know, Nikisha and I, there's a bit of overlap, as you can tell, in our fields. We are colleagues and friends as well. And so I'm going to try not to, but I think there's enough difference as well that I'm going to try to give a different perspective. So I will just go down the line with these questions too. So what is my current field of work? So I also work in lactation. And as I was listening to the bio, I was realizing how much my work has evolved, because I think my bio needs to be updated. I'm not doing as much direct lactation support as I did in previous years. I actually work far more in nonprofit management and advocacy in terms of running our nonprofit organization, Mom to Mom Global, and our sister organization, Breastfeeding in Combat Boots. So we are the only national nonprofit, we're a US-based nonprofit, and we're the only one focused on specifically providing breastfeeding support for military families. There are very unique needs and circumstances. Nikisha alluded to a little bit about moving around a lot. We have a lot of other unique circumstances that happen. And so our organization really came out of a very grassroots identified need. And so I have worked directly with supporting dyads, and I now have transitioned more into advocacy management and sort of moving us forward into the future to grow our organization and expand our network of support. And a lot of that looks like dismantling barriers to access to lactation support, skilled lactation support for military families. So that seems like a nice segue into the next question. What challenges have I faced during current and past advocacy work, and how have recent events interacted with those challenges? So military families face, our lives are different. Our lives are very different from most other people's families. We expect to move every 2 to 4 years, sometimes more frequently. We experience frequent separations of our partners, generally spouses, because generally if you are not married, the military does not recognize your relationship or your family. So in order to receive military benefits, you must be married. And so they make you get married, and then they take your spouse away from you for indeterminate lengths of time, and anytime they feel like it. Parenting has a lot of challenges under those circumstances. We also, with our Breastfeeding in Combat Boots, that organization exists to support the specific needs of military service members who are balancing breastfeeding their children with their own military careers. And so they have really unique needs as well. They return to duty at 12 weeks postpartum, generally, sometimes sooner. And depending on what their duties are, we have a number of questions. We have a number of frequently asked questions about things like exposure to hazardous material while breastfeeding, or how to manage and plan for long separations and maintain breastfeeding while I'm not going to be with my baby for a number of weeks or months. So we have had a lot of progress made within the military in the last few years. Since 2015, we've seen some sweeping changes We've seen new regulations and laws passed that protect the rights of military service members and families to breastfeed, but the implementation of that has been a bit spotty and inconsistent. So we're still working on advocacy in that way. In terms of recent political events, I mean, I want to echo what Nikisha is saying. We, as an organization, have always been committed to equity work as a core value and a core part of why our organization exists. And the reason for that is because we recognize that if we're going to serve all military families, we have to recognize and acknowledge that military families are made up of very diverse people who come from very diverse backgrounds, racially, culturally, religious backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. We have military families who are not American citizens, as a matter of fact. And all of that richness of diversity means that we have an obligation as lactation supporters to recognize and honor every person's individual journey and their individual goals. And so I think that's really where our intersection with social pedagogy comes in, is that, you know, we come from a place where we know that each family's infant feeding journey is unique and different, will look different and feel different. And because of that, that's where we start and end. We start and end with the family's agency, the family's needs, with supporting each parent, lactating parent, in how they define success for breastfeeding each child. In terms of recent events, it's been, well, I'll table that to the next one, viewing practice differently in light of the current political climate. So we have been facing a bit of a challenge with the political climate because the military is specifically and legally mandated to be apolitical. People who serve in the U.S. military are not allowed to make comments publicly about any current administration, political administration, or sitting elected office members. The military must exist as an apolitical body because the military exists to serve the Constitution of the United States, not any particular political party. So what we have seen in the last few weeks has been really remarkable. Which is, yeah, it's been really remarkable. We've seen a number of current and former military leaders speaking out publicly and taking a stand which is remarkable in and of itself. These are people who would never say anything publicly unless they were so moved that they felt it was part of their duty to speak out. And so and we've also seen the military that's been sort of thrust into this midpoint as a debate tool in the public discourse about what is the purpose of the military. And we've seen a sitting U.S. president threaten to use military force against American citizens. This has created quite a dilemma, a moral dilemma for many of our families. For example, we have National Guard. We've received questions from National Guardsmen who are deployed into cities where there have been protests as part of the political uprising. And they are asking the same questions as the protesters as far as, is it safe for me to continue to give my baby milk after I've been exposed to tear gas? These types of things. So it's really highlighted for us how, what a unique situation military families do live in, because we are many ways kept separate from civilian population. However, we also are American citizens. And that is why we are a part of the military. That is why service members sign up in general, is to serve a greater cause, to serve their country. And families sign up for that too. And so yeah, we have seen some really interesting political juxtaposition with the current events. As far as our primary focus, I don't know that our primary focus has changed much. I would say that our commitment to equity, particularly to racial equity, has become more visible. But it has not been, I mean, it's not a big change for us. As Nikisha said, this has been a huge part of the lactation and first foods discourse in the United States for a number of years. So as Mom to Mom Global was coming about, we formed 5 years ago. This was always part of our mission because we always recognized that in order to serve all breastfeeding military families, we have to be aware of the needs, that the needs of breastfeeding families are different based on where they fall in these intersectional categories of marginalized populations. We like to think that military service transcends any other socio-political situation, but that's not true. That's not the reality. And we've always been committed to equity in our work and to, like Karen mentioned, creating situations where families have autonomy and agency in terms of making decisions for their children and themselves. So that's what I have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Just a lot in there that I know that I've never considered, not really being associated with the military. So I appreciate that viewpoint, and I have a lot of questions. Thank you very much for sharing your work with us. Our next speaker is going to be Lois Scharf. And Lois is senior lecturer at the University of Central Lancashire and course leader for the Masters in Social Pedagogy Leadership, co-author of Social Pedagogy and Social Work, which is the UK's first book specifically focused on the link between social pedagogy and social work. Lois, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. And it's been a really great conference, so I'm really chuffed to be part of the presentation at the end. So like Dana said in her introduction to me, I work at the University of Central Lancashire, but before I came into teaching, I'm a qualified social worker. So I've had 12 years experience of being a social worker here in England, and kind of fell into teaching and then came across social pedagogy about 5 years, and we've been on this real journey along with FEMPRA. And so we've developed our BA in social pedagogy, advocacy and participation, and our MA in social pedagogical leadership. So, and for us, I think, for me in particular, social pedagogy is very much about developing relational practice with people that you work alongside, but also looking at the structural. So like Cara said at the beginning, looking at the structural things that keep people in their, keeping equality in its place are really, really important. So our MA in social pedagogy leadership, we were so excited about when we developed that alongside FEMPRA, because this is part of embedding social pedagogical practice much more in the UK. So for those of you that don't know, social pedagogy here in the UK is very much aligned with social work. So it's seen as something a little bit different, but it's something that social work, and particularly social workers, are kind of gaining an interest in. And here in the UK, we have two separate elements to social work. You either work with children and their families, or you work with adults, and you don't tend to work over both fields. So what we've done is that we've made sure that our degree and our MA in social pedagogy leadership covers both of those. And so it's been we've been really chuffed because we've been part of some great developments in particularly adult services. So we've been working with some, just to give you two examples, we've been working with the Prevention Alliance, which is a group of organisations that work with older adults and looking at how they can use social pedagogy to encourage well-being in older adults. We've also been working with Empowerment, which is an advocacy-based project in Blackpool, which is a very poor area here in England, and so helping them embed social pedagogy, which is a natural alignment to advocacy and advocacy work. So that's been really exciting, doing lots of training with social workers who are gaining a real interest. And this is because it has a real link with lots of current models that are being used in British social work. So things like strengths-based practice and relational ways of working, particularly with children and families. But for us, what social pedagogy brings is much more of a focus on your values, your haltum, and ethical practice. So I think one of the exciting things is looking at ethical leadership and ethical practice. What does that mean? So COVID has come along, and it has completely, within the space of about a week, changed how social workers have had to act. So I'm going to answer the next question: what challenges have we faced? Kind of just to give you some idea of what challenges are happening on the ground in social work and social care practice, and how this relates to then the teaching that we're doing. So there's been some real changes, and there's been, I think, a lot of social workers have felt that this has been an opportunity to do things differently, and services have responded really quickly with some really interesting practice. And so Brid Featherstone, who's a professor at Huddersfield, has done a lot of research, current research, and I'll put a link up in the chat box to her current blog, which talks about how social workers are finding that actually there's the pandemic homes and do assessments in people's houses, so they're having to think about more innovative practice, and this means that they're actually finding that they're reflecting on their practice a lot more, and this is something that we encourage with our students. So I suppose one of the other key things I need to say is that social pedagogy isn't just something we teach, it's something that we also demonstrate in our teaching. So everything we do is underpinned by social pedagogical practice, so that our students feel social pedagogy as well as kind of gain knowledge and kind of understanding around theory. They kind of see it modelled and can kind of feel that, so that then they can translate that then into their practice. And so reflective practice is something that we spend a lot of time with our students looking at. So again, Brid Featherstone in a current research has found that social workers are finding that the COVID pandemic has really made them have critically reflect on their practice, and instead of rushing in to fix things for families, having to step back and work much more collaboratively with these families, which I think is absolutely fantastic and a real clear link to social pedagogy. There's been some real concerns probably over the last couple of months around our government really weakening legal requirements around safeguarding, and they've done this in regards to adult social care and children and young people. And so social workers have become very vocal, along with ourselves in universities, around our real concerns about the government weakening these safeguards. They've brought in something called the COVID Act, which is ideologically based, we would argue, which is really about removing state responsibility for social work, and this is something that we are all very worried about. So again, that links with this idea, this notion of social pedagogy not just being about your relational practice, but also looking much more at the structures in society. But then there's lots of positives as well. So we're finding that lots of looked after children are saying that they feel that they've got much more control. So children that are in foster care or residential children's units are saying that they feel that they've got more control, and they're not having lots of professionals and social workers come and visit them, and they're not having to kind of go to school. They find school and professional meetings extremely stressful. So they feel like that there's been a little bit of a break from all of that, and that they've been able, having social workers involved in their lives in schools and not meeting their needs, that actually this has been a chance for them to kind of reduce the contact with professionals and kind of really, feel a little bit less stressed and calmed. One of the interesting things that Brid Featherstone has found is that children with disabilities are being greatly ignored. So we're still not getting it right, and there's lots of children with severe disabilities that are falling through the net, that are not meeting kind of needs and thresholds for services at this moment in time. And there's also been quite a lot of worry about the mental health of people in lockdown as well. So again, there's real links there with social pedagogy and kind of how do we connect with people? How do we help people feel that they have some meaningful belonging, even though they may well be locked down? Internet poverty is another real issue as well that we are seeing, and some of our students are actually looking at as part of their assignments on the MA, is how this is really heightening inequality. So if you haven't got access to the internet or the computer, that's having a real impact on your ability to connect with other people, stay involved and have communications with families, but also attend school as well if you're a kid. But then there's some really interesting things happening. So we have got something called the Human Learning System, which is really taking off here. This was a report, it's very social pedagogical in nature, but doesn't really talk about that, which is talking about how organisations really have to think about working in different ways, particularly in times of crisis. And so we've got one local authority here in England that is actually working with children and families to look at a recovery plan. So how do they not lose some of the excellent things that have been going on, and how do they move that forward into a recovery plan, you know, when we get through to the next phase. But there are still really big concerns around inequality, austerity, and the fact that we're going to be facing a big recession as well. So I think there's lots of work for us to do, and I think social pedagogy is really well placed in, you know, in direct practice, but also in organisations thinking about how can they work in a much more social pedagogical way to support their practitioners, their professionals, their employees to work in more meaningful ways. And with regards to our teaching, we've had to move everything online. So, you know, having this conference, instead of being face-to-face in sunny Preston, we are all on the internet instead. And so I think this has been a big learning curve for all of us. And I think for me personally, I've decided to take this challenge as a way of increasing my digital skills and, you know, finding different ways of connecting with people and keeping experiential learning as part of my teaching as well. And I suppose that answers the questions.
Awesome, Lois. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And next we will go to Joanna Henderson. Joanna is co-president of the Social Pedagogy Association in the United States, and she has worked in youth and education programs for 15 years with a special focus on immigrant and refugee youth and out-of-school time programming. She has a master's degree in social and cultural pedagogy from ASU, and recently, as of this week, returned to ASU from California to be the program manager for ASU's new Pathways for the Future Scholarship Program. And Joanna, we're thankful that you were able to take time out of your your first week on your new job to join us.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for contributing and talking about all these things that are happening. When I was initially asked to speak on this, I was thinking in, you know, COVID terms and like how everything has shifted, as Lois was just saying, to the online space. And then you bring in on top of the political situations that are happening in the US and around the world. So there's just a lot to discuss, and I'm glad that we have this space to do that. So current field of work has been in education and youth programming for, as Dana mentioned, for, you know, my whole career. Most recently with the San Jose Public Library, where I was managing a grant program that was funding out-of-school time programs in the San Jose, California area. And so in the middle of all of this, schools began to shut down and schools began to operate in a digital environment. And so we've had to really examine youth and education programming in that sense. And so in terms of all this field of work, it's very much connected to the social pedagogy background that we've been talking about. Youth and education is relevant across all of these domains that we've mentioned: social work, education, social education, all of the above. And so we've always had in mind the equitable challenges that youth are facing in school systems and out of school time systems as well. And COVID has really brought forward the inequitable outcomes that our students are experiencing in the classrooms. And so I was kind of looking at it in terms of, I think Kara mentioned it in the beginning, the practices and structures of social pedagogy. So looking at youth and education programming, things that are changing, you know, having fewer kids in a classroom, which could be considered a positive. Instead of having 30 students in a space, you have to have much less kids, which results in better one-on-one interaction with adults. However, you know, there's the opposite of that, leaving certain kids out or access to opportunities for those kids who can't attend in person. Also considering the spaces that we're occupying, so keeping those spaces safe, healthy, you know, in a physical environment, to keep them safe. The other operational components that we're looking at are digital access, which again, I think Lois brought up as well. That has been the biggest concern of our programs. And so looking at the educational out of school time programs that couldn't operate any longer, even day school programs couldn't operate in the same way, we were seeing that about 25% of kids maybe would log in to the school assignments. And so, that leaves 75% of kids who aren't accessing education traditionally. And then considering out of school time education, that's an even smaller percentage because all school is essentially out of school time now. And so that kind of shifted that whole operational strategy. The other biggest concern that has kind of come up in the Bay Area, considering the cost of living here, and it will probably extend outward as well, is just staffing issues. And so not having enough staff to even be available for programs, and then considering the funding elements of it, that there isn't going to be as much funding available to meet the higher demand. If we're having, fewer students in the classroom, we have to have smaller classrooms, therefore we need more teachers. But at the same time, local governments, the program that I was running was through a local government. And so the funding that we had is also at risk, considering that cities are on the verge of some sort of economic downshift. And so that funding is very much precarious, and not knowing, what's going to happen to the programs in the long term. And so kind of, going back to that whole recessionary situation that might come up after that. So, but also in terms of strategy and kind of the structures that are in place, there's been a lot more talk for youth and children specifically around social emotional learning. So considering the impact that this is having on mental health of students, and if that's, if schools are going to happen in person at some point, whether it's in the fall or beyond, bringing kids back into a space together is going to present significant challenges to classroom environments, to teachers, for students who have been out of school for 6 months or more and not knowing how to be in classrooms or, have, especially when you consider social distancing, and, kids love to hug and love to be very physical. And so having to operate in that space is going to be a challenge. But it's good for schools and institutions, in school, out of school, whatever, to think about social emotional learning and to really embed that kind of practice to thinking about the well-being of children into educational situations, into schools, into classrooms, into education programs in general, will benefit children to help them adjust and kind of function in a way that is better for them. And I think, again, in youth and education programs, and I hope the youth and education colleagues who are on this panel listening as well can also talk about this, but realizing that equity and access has been a conversation that we've had for as long as I've been in it. So talking about student access and equity is a huge component. But again, this shutdown of schools has really brought forward that to the height of it, particularly, as I mentioned, in digital equity and digital access. And so the grant that I was operating was meant to go to after school time programs, and it is directed by the city council, and city council decided to shift that funding to be a way of closing the digital gap. So schools could purchase laptops or tablets for their students, or they could purchase Wi-Fi hotspots, things like that weren't necessarily what the intent of the grant program was before. And so that was one way of being sort of reactionary to it. However, we heard from some of our grantees in our school districts that wasn't necessarily the need. So school districts had already purchased, computers for their students to access learning online at home. But families don't know how to access the internet, or their digital literacy is very limited and they don't know how to do a Zoom call, or they don't know how to operate in that kind of digital space, which, we all have challenges with. We all have, Zoom calls all day. If you can imagine a child sitting on a Zoom call for more than 30 minutes at a time, that's kind of what education is looking like. And so these are all questions that I don't have the answer to, and I don't think the education world has the answer to, but it's being discussed, and it's a really good space for that to happen. And so I think, just continuing that conversation around it. One of the other points I wanted to bring up too, just about the challenges and kind of the political climate, in talking about equity and just the way that, the language we use in youth and education programs, one of the ways of like looking at it is just thinking about the language we use. Things like terms like grit, like having kids have, grit to complete their schooling. Like that's, saying that students don't have the opportunity to change their learning environment if it's not suited for them. And so they need to be tougher, or they need to be stronger to get through that. And that's kind of a way of like putting the onus on them versus the system that's maybe not meant for them. And so I think these are all really good conversations that are happening, and youth and education space is a really important place to have that. And I think it's one of the ways that we're going to see a lot of the changes going forward in the future. But really like looking at that language for how we talk about what students need to do to be successful in school. And in terms of just to kind of touch on the last bit of the questions here, I kind of went to jump all over the place, but changes in terms of current advocacy work, again, the changes focus really on this digital space and how can we actually do the work that we do with people and relationships and all of these things in an online virtual environment. And so that's just something that's going to have to be considered, going into the future, and it has potential for being really good for children and youth, but it also brings up these equity issues, both around, what devices we have, what access to the internet we have, and how to actually use it all together. And so I think that's kind of where my advocacy and my mind shift is kind of focusing, particularly looking at education programming, both in like youth and higher education and all of the above. And so I think these are really kind of touching on all the points that have been discussed. And there's a few other conferences or presentations that were given earlier today that I'm going to go back and view because they came on at late hours for me. But there's lots of contribution to happen, conversation to happen around these topics.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joanna. It's a good snapshot kind of what's going on with education in the United States, current circumstances. Our final speaker today is Alicia Manuel. Alicia is the founder of Three Precious Miracles, an incorporated Arizona nonprofit organization that supports Native American children who are in or who have been a part of our foster care system. She was born and raised in Arizona, and they have, she lives in Casa Grande with her husband, Tecumseh, and their 3 adopted children, Tecumseh, Talicia, and Micah. And she's passionate about providing Native American children with loving, caring, culturally sensitive homes. She's dedicated 15 years of her professional career to empowering the lives of families within the Gila River Indian Community Employment and Training Department. Alicia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, thank you. It's an honor to be here to hear everybody else's presentation and just kind of be a part of this space. So hello everybody. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started with what is my current field of work. And first and foremost, I have 3 little kids. So my work is kids to 2 7-year-olds and a 6-year-old. So I'm a very busy mom. But the organization is my volunteer field of work. The nonprofit started 6 years ago, and it was Three Precious Miracles is Tecumseh, Precious, and Micah. Those are my 3 kids. They're my 3 precious miracles. So basically, Tecumseh and I found that there was such a huge need of Native American children in foster care, and there was a lack of foster homes or adoptive homes for Native children, and many of them were being placed in non-Native homes. So we decided, you know what, we need to start an organization. We need to start something. We need to try to help families. And in that time, it just kind of blew up where in Arizona, there's 22 tribes. So, and they're all throughout Arizona. And so we were blessed to adopt 3 from Gila River, which is my husband's tribe, and said, there is not just a problem with families getting involved, Native Americans to adopt Native children, but there's also a lack of resources for families because they're in such rural areas. And through that process, we found out with a lot of the foster parents that had Native children, there was a lack of culture awareness. And what was information was being provided to them to keep culture connected. So my main field of work is to help Native children that are in foster care, also to help the parents, the kinship families that are taking in kids if they need resources, or if the non-natives need culture awareness and understanding that child, and then for the children, keeping that culture connected. So we provide cultural events for children and for the family. So when we have an event, we say, invite the whole family. We want, if you're non-native, bring grandma, grandpa, bring your other kids. We want them to all understand the beauty of Native American culture. And it's not just about that one child, it's about all of you as a family unit and loving each other. So that's what we do. It's been a blessing to be able to do this, and we've been able to provide resources not only to Arizona, but to touch families in Washington, California, and other states that have reached out to us and said, hey, we hear what you're doing. Can you send us some information? We had started a project, a quilting a blanket. So we had elders and individuals quilt a blanket. And then what we would do is we currently still accept applications to keep culture connected. So basically this blanket will be embroidered with this child's name, tribal affiliation, and it has like a tribal saying in there, just saying, that their culture will always be connected. So we've been able to ship those out to other states and reach other kids to let them know that they may not be in their home or their tribe, but we love them and we want to let them know where they're from. And so nobody probably want to take their blanket if it has their name on it. So that's my field of work, is to helping those children. What challenges have you faced during your current and past advocacy work? So right now, all events have canceled. We're not able to provide that. And like I said, we provide a lot of cultural activities and bringing families together. So with that has been a challenge. We run off of volunteers. So we don't have some big funding plan or any paid staff. I do this from the love of my heart, and so do my volunteers. My husband is responsible for a lot of the work that I put on him. So honey-do list is very busy. But really, the challenges is to make sure that we can keep these cultures connected. And so I depend a lot on my volunteers just to help me, because there's so many tribes, there's so many traditions. And so I would say me, if I have a Navajo child, I need to contact, someone that I know from the Navajo reservation that can make that connection. So we've made some really good connections. We had a child here from Potawatomi tribe in Arizona, and that's in another state. So we were able to get a hold of an elected official to connect with that family. So that was really interesting and really awesome. But just being able to keep that going, has been interesting. So I'm going to go down to what are you viewing your practices? So currently right now with the political climate, I would say for me and for the organization, I really haven't allowed that to affect what's going on. My mission is to support Native children, and they may have families of different races or different religions, and I'm okay with that. So in the light of everything daily, I would say that we're going to continue to serve children. They're our priority, and keeping that culture connected for for them and as they grow up. What we've seen in the past is that children age out of foster care, they try to go back to the reservation and they know nothing. And so that becomes a hardship. So what we like to do is try to, get them now so that that isn't a problem. They know what's going on in their community. It's not as easy. I know some individuals will think, oh, well, they could just look on the internet. Well, it's not that easy sometimes. So I would say as of right now, I'm working from home with 3 little kids, and like I said, the organization is volunteer driven. So we've been running everything out of my home right now, which has been pretty different, not being able to go to the office and serve families too much. But it's been really amazing too. It's been really awesome because you start thinking, well, what else can you do, and what's available. So we had created a family engagement bag. Everybody was in quarantine, so we created these bags to help families during this time, where it would have activities for the kids, activities for the family, board games, a journal specifically for the parent to be able to document, what they're feeling and how they're doing, because we're all in this situation, but also to embrace this opportunity of learning. My son is autistic, he's 7, and I'm learning a new way to communicate with this little guy that has developed a huge fear of anxiety when mom leaves the room. So I know now it takes me 2 days to say, son, mom has to go to the office on, such and such day, but your dad will be here. And so even for me as a mom, that I was so busy and working a full-time job, I've learned now that there's a different way. And so, to be honest, I feel like this is a blessing too, because I think in general, online is definitely hard, and working on phone calls and conference is very different. But I would say there's a blessing for each of us. Maybe you cleaned out your closet that you didn't do for 2 years, but it's just that the climate has allowed me, not only as a nonprofit owner, but a busy mom, to just really sit down and do things different for my family and learn new things. So that has been pretty awesome. Has your primary focus recently changed within your current advocacy work? So yes, of course. We are now doing, of course, things online. How can we get that information to our families and to our children in a different aspect? If we can't have a powwow this year, or have them meet a member of royalty from the state, then how can we connect with them? So what we've been doing is sharing a lot of Native American cultural ideas through our social media, so that families can link there. So we have like coloring pages, we have powwow information. We try to work with the families that have Native children for a specific tribe to get them connected with someone with that community. But then this just kind of just been opening up so much, I would say, and this is something that I like, and I want to keep this going. And so it's not something you just kind of just think outside the box and say, you know what, this is working a whole lot more than what I thought it would. And so it's been really, I guess, breaking different barriers, I would say, and what I thought was in before, like, no, that wouldn't work, but actually it really does work, and we can change things up a bit. So I just have to say that I really appreciate being here and being able to share the organization with this team of experts. I tell people all the time, I'm just a mom. I'm just a mom. That's it. I had a passion to help kids. I always have. And as a Native American that did not grow up in my culture, I didn't have that. And so, no, I wasn't a foster child, but I didn't have that cultural component to me. So for my kids, and for the kids that are in foster care, I felt like it is very important. It's kind of like when grandpa or grandma passes away and you receive a locket from them or their old leather jacket, and it's so sacred to you as a person. It's like that. I received a um, a dress outfit from an elder that her granddaughter was adopted, and this was last year. And I'm telling you that when I put that piece of material on me, I felt like the links in my heart just connected. So as anybody else that would receive something from somebody that's so important in their life, we're connecting lockets all over through foster care and through advocacy work. This month is reunification month. So if we have parents that are trying to fight to get their kids back, we want to try to help them too. Recently I received a call from a mother saying she was told not to speak her language to her child during the virtual visit. And I said, no, that has to be part of the conversation. It's not the norm, but we're going to change the norm. We want to make sure that that child stays connected. So, all in all, I want to say that, this work has been truly a blessing. And that's why Three Precious Miracles, Tecumseh, Precious, and Micah, are going to have a legacy down the road of changing lives for children, not only in Arizona, but in many states and maybe around the world. So, I would love to link up with other partners and, and if I can share what we're doing or maybe help some Native children in your area, and it's with a different tribe, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. We can create programs together in a new way. So thank you for allowing me to share.
Oh, that's awesome, Lacey. I have to say you brought tears to my eyes. Just that idea of connection, and that's something that we can all relate to. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing, especially here in Arizona. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I can't believe we're over an hour already. I've just been so engrossed in everybody's, information about their work and what they're doing. And so we are going to stay in the room. If you need to leave, feel free to leave at any time. But I really do want to get some other input and go through the questions that we have. First of all, I just want to say a huge thank you, a round of applause, if we can do it this way, for all of our speakers. You are all wonderful. I appreciate you coming and sharing your work with us. And I think that the thing that we see in these international conferences is that we have so much in common that we can pull from other places, no matter where we are in the world, and using social pedagogy as a foundation for that.